There's something unsettling about cities that never sleep. The glowing skyline, the neon reflections in rain-soaked concrete, the rhythm of traffic that never slows. Everything feels alive, but in a way that keeps you alert. Some people find comfort in that constant motion. Others never get the chance to decide. This story begins in Denver, Colorado, a place known for opportunity, college dreams, and nightlife full of loud music and louder promises. But behind the clubs, expensive cocktails, and bright LED screens, there's another side. One most people never see unless they're unlucky enough to stumble into it. And on the night of May 23rd, one young woman unknowingly walked straight into it. Her name was Harlow Bennett. To anyone else, Harlow was just another college student trying to find her place in a big and unfamiliar city. But if you asked the people who knew her, her parents, her childhood friends, her professors, they'd tell you she was something different. Someone who cared deeply, someone who listened, someone who didn't just move through the world, she paid attention to it. But even careful people have blind spots, and cities like Denver have a way of turning blind spots into danger. Before that night, before the flashing police tape and the quiet courtroom filled with grief, before the headlines and the questions that would never have satisfying answers, there was simply a young woman trying to live her life. Harlow grew up in a small town in Vermont, the type of place where everyone knows everyone and front doors don't always need locks. Her childhood was simple. Weekends meant family gatherings, piano practice, soccer games on Sundays, and bonfires with friends during the fall. She had a laugh that people remembered, a soft laugh, not loud or attention-seeking, but genuine. The kind that made you smile without thinking. Her parents, Jonathan and Elise Bennett, were the type of parents who showed love through actions. Packed lunches, rides to school events, late-night study snacks. They didn't want much for themselves, but they wanted everything for their daughters. And when Harlow earned a partial scholarship to Jefferson State University in Denver, they were proud, terrified, but proud. Harlow wasn't reckless. She wasn't naive. She knew moving across the country would be a challenge. She wasn't used to busy streets, sirens echoing through the night, or the sharp edge that sometimes lingered in strangers' smiles. But she was determined to grow, academically, socially, personally. And slowly, she did. She made friends, got used to public transit, found a cafe she loved, the kind with mismatched chairs and overpriced lattes she bought anyway. And somewhere along the way, Denver started to feel less overwhelming and more like possibility. Her closest friend in school was Sienna Clark, a loud, funny, quick-witted girl who acted first and thought later. If Harlow was quiet water, Sienna was fire. They were opposites, but the kind that brought balance rather than conflict. They studied together, complained together, and planned spontaneous, stress relief weekends that mostly consisted of popcorn, old movies, and falling asleep before midnight. But on May 23rd, things felt different. Earlier that week, Sienna had waved 2 tickets with a grin so wide it was impossible not to laugh. A popular hip-hop artist was performing downtown, and Sienna insisted they go, not just to watch, but to experience the night like real city people. Harlow hesitated at first. Finals were approaching. She wasn't sure about late nights. But after a long week of studying and academic pressure, the idea of letting go, even for just a few hours, felt deserved. So she agreed. That night, Harlow dressed simply. She didn't believe in changing who she was just because the world around her expected a certain image. A soft sweater, jeans, light makeup, and her silver necklace. Nothing flashy, nothing bold. Sienna, on the other hand, looked ready for a magazine shoot. Sparkly eyeliner, leather jacket, hair styled to perfection. The two laughed as they walked to the train, unaware that laughter would soon turn into silence. The concert was everything Sienna hoped it would be. Loud, chaotic, filled with flashing lights and strangers dancing with strangers. Even Harlow, usually reserved, let the energy carry her for a while. She texted her mom a photo captioned, "Big night, don't worry, safe with friends, love you." It would be the last message her mother ever received from her. After the show, the plan was simple. Get a drink or two, then catch the first bus back to campus. But plans have a way of shifting when the wrong people show up. Near the exit, while studying the late-night transit map, two men approached them. One introduced himself as Travis Monroe, confident, smooth, dressed like someone who spent a lot of time in clubs. The other, Aiden Brooks, seemed younger, less composed, following Travis's lead like a shadow. They were polite at first. Friendly, helpful. The kind of men who made you lower your guard because nothing about them seemed threatening, not immediately. Sienna talked the most. Harlow spoke less but didn't feel unsafe. Not yet. Travis claimed he knew the city nightlife well. He suggested a nearby bar. Nothing crazy, just somewhere chill before you head home. Sienna agreed enthusiastically. Harlow hesitated. Something small, felt off. But it was late, the streets were loud, and saying no felt awkward when everyone else was already moving. So she went. And that decision, one that seemed insignificant, one that millions of people make every weekend, would place her on a path she couldn't escape. Because somewhere between the music, the flashing lights, the drinks, and the blurred conversations, lines were crossed, choices were taken from her. And the version of the night she expected, the laughter, the memories, the inside jokes to tell later, slowly dissolved into something cold, dark, and irreversible. What Harlow didn't know was this: Travis and Aiden weren't strangers acting on coincidence. They were looking for opportunity, and that night, they believed they found it. If there's one truth about nights out in a big city, it's this: everything feels harmless until something shifts, and it's never loud, never obvious. It happens quietly, almost invisibly, one detail at a time. When Harlow, Sienna, Travis, and Aiden left the concert venue, the night was still buzzing with energy. Crowds spilled out onto the sidewalks, laughing, talking, scrolling through their phones, posting clips of the show. The city felt alive, electric. The four walked side by side toward East Pine District, a part of Denver known for nightlife. Bars stacked shoulder to shoulder, neon signs reflecting off the street, music leaking out of open doorways. It's the kind of place where strangers become temporary friends, secrets stay unheard, and sometimes intentions get blurred. Travis led the group confidently, like someone who'd done this walk dozens of times. Aiden stayed close but quiet, occasionally glancing back to check if Harlow and Sienna were following. No one said it out loud, but the group dynamic was already clear. Sienna gravitated toward the excitement, toward Travis. Harlow played the observer, watchful, measured. Aiden drifted between roles, unsure whether he was part of the conversation or just accompanying someone else's plan. They arrived at the bar, a low-lit place called Silver Raven Lounge, tucked between a tattoo shop and a ramen house. The door was marked only by a hanging metal raven sign, swinging gently in the breeze. Inside, It smelled like citrus cleaner, spilled beer, and old wood. A DJ played down-tempo electronic music. Not loud, not soft, just enough to make conversations blend into a steady hum. The bartender nodded as Travis walked in. Not the nod you give a stranger. The nod you give someone you've seen before. Sienna didn't notice. Harlow did. Not enough to be scared, just enough to remember. They found a small, high-top table in the corner, partially lit by a red neon sign that read, "Tonight starts now." Sienna laughed immediately. Harlow looked at it longer than she meant to. They ordered drinks. Nothing unusual. Sienna got something fruity and neon-colored. Harlow picked something milder. Travis ordered whiskey neat. Aiden asked for a beer. For the first 20 minutes, everything felt normal. They talked about the concert, about the stage lights, the energy, the songs everyone knew the words to. Sienna and Travis traded jokes and stories about other nights out. Harlow chimed in when she felt pulled into the conversation, but mostly she listened. There's a certain way strangers tell stories when they still want to impress someone. Every sentence has polish. Every laugh is a little too perfectly timed. That's how Travis spoke. Smooth. Effortless. Aiden spoke less. When he did, he stumbled over his words like he wasn't sure if his voice mattered. At some point, the bartender brought a second round to the table before anyone ordered it. "On the house," he said. Sienna raised her glass, excited. Harlow hesitated. "Are you sure?" she asked. Travis grinned. "Yeah, friend of mine. Perks of knowing the right places." Harlow nodded politely, but something in her posture stiffened. Not enough to notice unless you were watching closely. Still, she took the drink. Not eager, not suspicious. Just following the moment the way people do when they don't want to stand out. The music shifted. Low bass, softer melody. The lighting in the bar felt warmer, dimmer, fuzzier. A few minutes passed. Then the third round arrived. Tequila shots. This time, Travis insisted. "To new friends," he said. Sienna clinked glasses enthusiastically. Harlow glanced between the drink and the group. She wasn't drunk, not yet, but there was a delay forming behind her thoughts. Like her brain had stepped half a second behind her body, she swallowed. The tequila burned, sharp at first, then warm. Moments later, something felt wrong. Not dizzy, not nauseous, just off. A softness in the room that didn't belong. Shadows blurred. The neon sign looked like melted paint. The music slowed, not literally, but in her perception. Her voice felt further away when she tried to speak. "Sienna," she said quietly. Sienna didn't hear her. She was laughing too loudly. Travis watched, not with concern, but with a calm, patient awareness, like someone checking the time rather than checking on a person. Aiden shifted in his seat, chewing the inside of his cheek, eyes darting between Travis and the two women. Harlow blinked, trying to anchor herself. Her thoughts weren't forming clearly anymore. She placed her hand on the table, not because she needed support, but because her body reacted faster than her reasoning could. She tried to focus. Faces blurred, sounds stretched. Something was happening, and she knew it. But she couldn't name it. Not out loud. Not even in her mind. Sienna was slower too now. Her laugh softer, words slurring slightly. Her head leaning more heavily toward Travis. Harlow looked for an exit sign, just to reassure herself she could leave if she needed to. 2 signs, both clear. So why did the room feel smaller? She inhaled through her nose, an instinctive attempt to steady herself, but steadiness didn't come. Instead, weight. A slow, heavy pull, like gravity thickening. Travis stood smoothly. "Looks like you two overdid it," he said in a tone that wasn't mocking, just matter-of-fact in a way that didn't match normal concern. Aiden rose too, but hesitated. His hands stayed at his sides, unsure whether to help or step back. Harlow tried to stand. Her legs didn't respond the way she expected. It wasn't drunken clumsiness. It was like her body wasn't fully hers. A quiet alarm went off in her head. Not panic, just a small, sharp realization. Something isn't right. She grabbed the edge of the table to steady herself. Sienna giggled softly, unaware, or unable to be aware. Travis guided her, gently but firmly. Aiden hovered behind Harlow. "Harlow," he said, "you okay?" His voice sounded far away. Her answer never came, not because she didn't want to respond, but because the words dissolved before she could speak them. Travis nodded to the bartender on their way out. A small acknowledgement. Not a goodbye. More like a signal. Outside, the air was cooler, but it didn't help. Streetlights blurred. Passing cars felt silent. And the city that once looked vibrant now looked indifferent. Like it had seen this before. They weren't walking anymore. They were being moved, guided, escorted. And the night, which once felt full of possibilities, now felt like it was closing in. Harlow tried one last thing, something small. She reached for her phone, her fingers brushed it, then slipped away. Her vision dimmed, not entirely, but enough. And somewhere between the sidewalk and the waiting vehicle, a thought surfaced. Quiet, terrifyingly calm. This wasn't bad luck. This was planned. But by the time that realization formed, the point of return was already behind her. Some moments in life are loud, chaotic, unforgettable. Others slip by quietly, unnoticed, until later. When someone rewinds the memory frame by frame and realizes everything was already going wrong. Leaving Silver Raven Lounge, the night air felt colder than before. Streetlights stretched across the sidewalk in long yellow lines, and the once busy nightlife district seemed to thin out, its noise fading into something softer, almost distant. To anyone watching, it would have looked like a group of friends ending a night out. Just 4 young adults walking down the sidewalk, sharing the same direction, the same pieces of laughter. But the difference now wasn't visible from far away. It was in the details. Harlow wasn't walking the same way she had walked earlier. Her steps weren't unsteady because of carelessness. They were slow, delayed, like her body needed a moment longer to understand each movement. Her eyelids blinked with a strange rhythm, her focus drifting in and out like a fading signal. Sienna was affected too, but she masked it with laughter, leaning into Travis's arm as if she meant to. Maybe part of her believed she did. Maybe she couldn't tell the difference anymore. Travis stayed beside her, posture relaxed, expression controlled. There was no urgency in the way he moved, no concern, just quiet confidence, like someone following a script he already knew the ending to. Aiden walked behind them with Harlow. If someone had filmed that moment and slowed it down, his face would have stood out. Not because of malice, but because of uncertainty. He looked at Harlow once, then away, like he wasn't sure whether to speak or stay silent, and silence won. It usually does in moments where speaking requires courage people don't expect they'll need. A black SUV waited at the curb, its engine running, headlights cutting through the emptying street. The backseat door was open. Travis gestured toward it. Sienna stepped in first without hesitation. Harlow hesitated, not physically, but in the way her body paused slightly before moving. A faint instinct flickered, one last bit of clarity struggling through the fog. She touched the door frame, not to steady herself, but because her brain was searching for something familiar to hold on to. Then she sat down. The door closed. The city outside didn't react. No alarms, no flashing warnings, no witnesses stepping forward. Just another car blending into Denver traffic. Inside the vehicle, the world felt smaller. The hum of the engine mixed with the steady rhythm of tires rolling over asphalt. The interior smelled faintly of leather and cologne. At first, no one spoke. Then Travis broke the silence, softly, almost casually. "You two okay back there?" Sienna mumbled something between a laugh and a slurred sentence. Harlow tried to answer, but the words stopped somewhere between her chest and her throat. Aiden watched through the rearview mirror, not fully meeting her eyes, but close. For a brief second, something silent passed between them. Not a conversation, just awareness. If Harlow had been fully conscious, maybe she would have noticed it. Maybe she would have asked what that hesitation meant. But her thoughts were slipping further away now, like pages in a book turning without her. The drive didn't last long. Maybe 15 minutes, maybe 20. Time has a strange way of stretching when something feels wrong. For Harlow, the world blurred into streetlights sliding past the window. Bright, then gone. Bright, then gone. The SUV pulled up to Marigold Tower Hotel, one of those places designed to look upscale but not personal. Glass entrance, polished floors, a lobby that stayed awake even when people were asleep. Inside, the atmosphere shifted again, this time quieter than the bar, calmer than the street, but heavier. The night manager, Cole Harrington, noticed them as soon as they walked in. Not because they stood out, but because he'd worked enough night shifts to recognize patterns. The exhausted travelers, the drunk bachelorette groups, and occasionally, the groups where something didn't fit. In this case, it was the contrast between the men's alert posture and the women's fading awareness. But protocol isn't intuition, and intuition alone doesn't stop people. Travis approached the counter. 2 rooms, he said confidently. Already booked, under Monroe. Cole checked the reservation. Room 2004, room 2006. Everything looked normal on the system. Sienna leaned against the marble counter, swaying slightly. Harlow stayed still, not because she chose to, but because her body wasn't cooperating anymore. Sorry, she whispered, barely audible even to herself. The sound didn't travel far. Cole exhaled, slowly, thinking. "Do you need a wheelchair for them?" he asked. Not sarcastic, not judgmental, just practical. Travis answered too quickly. "That'd be great." Wheelchairs arrived. Sienna sat, still smiling, still unaware. Harlow didn't sit immediately. For a moment, she stood looking downward, like she was trying to remind her legs what standing meant. Aiden was the one who helped her into the chair, carefully, almost reluctantly. His hands didn't guide with confidence. They hovered, unsure. And Harlow, somewhere deep inside the fog, felt something. Not fear, not panic. Something softer. A quiet internal sentence that never fully formed. This shouldn't be happening. But once she was seated, movement resumed. Smooth, efficient, practiced. Cole watched the group disappear into the elevator. The doors closed. The sound echoed. After that, the lobby returned to silence. Just the desk light, the hum of the vending machine across the hall, and the distant elevator bell announcing each floor. Inside the elevator, the tone changed again. Not dramatic, just colder. Sienna slumped into her chair, head tilted. Harlow stared at the floor, her mind flickering, memories, half-thoughts, disconnected images, the hotel carpet, the elevator buttons glowing, the faint reflection of herself in the mirrored wall. Still her, but not fully. Somewhere above them, the elevator chimed. Level 20. The hallway was quiet. Soft gold lighting, modern patterns, thick carpet absorbing sound. Travis directed the movement. "Room 2004 for her," he said, nodding toward Harlow. 2006 for the other. Sienna murmured nothing coherent. Aiden paused again. Just a second. Just long enough for doubt to become visible. But doubt without action is just thought. And thoughts don't stop hallways from continuing forward. As they reached the doors, the corridor felt impossibly silent. No voices, no footsteps, no doors opening, just the soft mechanical sound of a keycard unlocking a room, a beeping tone, a click, a door widening into darkness. And in that instant, if someone could have frozen the world and asked Harlow a single question, "Do you want to step forward?" Maybe she would have said no. Maybe she would have screamed. Maybe she would have run. But the world didn't freeze, and her voice, like everything else, stayed quiet. The door closed. The hallway returned to stillness. And somewhere inside that hotel, the night continued. Not loudly, not violently, quietly, the kind of quiet that leaves a mark long after it ends. Silent hallways have a strange kind of memory. They hold footsteps, voices, and moments people wish no one saw. And in places like hotels, where thousands of strangers cross paths every month, security cameras tend to become the only witnesses that never forget. After the elevator doors closed behind them, the rest of the world kept going. Cars rolled through downtown traffic, bartenders locked up, and night shift workers drank burnt coffee while waiting for morning. But inside the 20th floor of Marigold Tower Hotel, time slowed. Not dramatically, not noticeably. Just enough that every small action suddenly mattered. At 2:47 a.m., hallway camera 20C captured the group emerging from the elevator. The footage didn't scream danger. There was no violence, no shouting, no visible force. Instead, it showed something more subtle. Sienna laughing softly, unaware of her surroundings. Harlow moving slowly, her posture heavy and unsteady. Travis leading the way with calm confidence. Aiden trailing behind, with an expression that couldn't decide whether it belonged there. To anyone watching live, it would have looked like another late-night check-in. Maybe a party that ran longer than expected. Maybe people who drank too much and needed a place to crash. But recordings don't understand intentions. They only show truth. At 2:49 a.m., Travis unlocked room 2004. He held the door open, glanced down the hallway, then motioned for Aiden. Aiden paused before moving Harlow forward. In the video, it was a 1-second hesitation. In reality, it was everything. The small space where conscience fights instinct. Where a single choice could shift an outcome. But then the hesitation ended. Harlow was wheeled into the room. The lock clicked shut. 2 doors down, at room 2006, Aiden repeated the process with Sienna. She slumped sideways in the chair, still half smiling. The door closed behind her. And just like that, the hallway was empty. The only sounds were the hum of the ventilation system, the faint chime of elevators in the distance, and the electronic locks resetting. For the next 31 minutes, no one entered the hallway. No one exited. No one knocked. No one listened. Human memory would never recover those minutes. The cameras, however, did. At 3:20 a.m., something changed. In the lobby, night manager Cole Harrington received a call from a guest. "I hear something loud, thumping or furniture moving. Can someone check?" Cole didn't move quickly. Noise complaints at that hour weren't unusual, but professional instinct told him to pay attention. So he grabbed the master key card, straightened his shirt, and took the elevator up. Security footage shows him stepping off the elevator at 3:23 a.m. He walked down the hall, paused outside room 2004, and knocked. No answer. He knocked again, firmer, still nothing. Cole leaned closer, not to eavesdrop, but to evaluate. He later described the noise as irregular, not like voices, not like an argument, more like struggling movement. A third knock, still silence. Cole used the master key. When the lock disengaged, the door opened an inch, blocked by resistance. Something was near it. Slowly, carefully, he pushed again. This time, the door moved, and on camera, Cole's posture changes. He stiffens slightly, stops breathing for a second, and steps inside. The hallway camera has no view of the room, but Cole's body language tells the story. Confusion, concern, then urgency. He disappears inside. 17 seconds later, he returns to the doorway and speaks sharply into his radio. His tone suddenly crisp, controlled, different. Within minutes, paramedics were on their way. What Cole found in room 2004 wasn't dramatic or cinematic. It was quiet. Too quiet. Harlow Bennett lay on the floor beside the bed, her eyes closed, her breathing shallow, or maybe already gone. Her hair draped across her shoulder as if she had simply fallen asleep in the wrong place. There were no signs of a fight. No overturned furniture, no broken objects. But details stood out. Her posture wasn't natural. Her necklace was slightly twisted. Her skin looked pale, not the pale of someone tired, but the pale that suggests the body is shutting down. Cole knelt beside her, calling her name, not because he knew it, but because saying a name feels more human than saying miss or ma'am. She didn't respond. That room, once just another numbered door, was now a crime scene in the making. In room 2006, paramedics found Sienna Clark unconscious on the bed, breathing, but deeply unresponsive. She had no memory of being placed there, no awareness of what time it was, no understanding of how the night shifted so fast. Her last clear memory would later be described as a blurry table, lights bending, and someone laughing. She didn't remember the hallway. She didn't remember the elevator. She didn't remember the SUV. And she didn't remember the moment the night stopped being fun. Meanwhile, security reviewed the footage. Frame after frame revealed a story no one had spoken aloud. Harlow entering the hallway with assistance, Sienna smiling through confusion, Travis leading, Aidan second-guessing, 2 rooms, 2 locked doors, and now 2 emergencies unfolding minutes apart. Police were contacted. Emergency responders worked quickly, but time wasn't on their side. At 3:55 a.m., Harlow was officially pronounced dead. That timestamp, once nothing more than digits on a medical chart, would become the center of everything that followed. Courtroom debates, detective reports, forensic testimony, family grief, media speculation, all orbiting that single irreversible moment. Back at the hotel, while medical staff worked, officers questioned the night manager. Did the guests seem distressed when they checked in? No, Cole answered. Then, after a pause, but something felt off. Not enough to stop anything, just enough to remember later. Police pulled the guest registry, camera logs, and payment records. 2 names surfaced: Travis Monroe, Aiden Brooks. They weren't at the hotel anymore, but they weren't invisible either. Paper trails never lie, and cameras never forget. As morning crept across Denver, replacing neon light with sunlight, the building looked exactly the same from the outside. People walked past the entrance, unaware of what hours earlier unfolded behind quiet doors and soft carpet. A normal city morning. Coffee shops opening, students heading to early classes, traffic growing heavier. Life continued. Except for the families whose lives would never return to the version they knew yesterday. Because in cases like this, the world doesn't end with noise. It ends quietly. A closed elevator door, a hallway camera blinking, a name on a hotel registry, and a young woman whose final night shouldn't have been her last. When a crime scene forms unexpectedly, investigators don't begin with assumptions. They begin with silence. Silence reveals space, and space reveals details. And in cases like this, where almost nothing was said out loud, the evidence became the first voice willing to speak. By sunrise, Marigold Tower Hotel no longer felt like a place for business travelers and weekend getaways. It felt like a confined timeline, a building holding the last decisions of a young woman whose night changed without warning. The Denver Police Department arrived just after 6 a.m. The detectives assigned weren't newcomers. They were used to the kind of cases where truth didn't surface easily. Lead investigator Detective Renee Maddox stepped into the hallway first. She was the kind of detective who didn't rush toward answers. She waited for them to reveal themselves. Years on the job had taught her one thing: people lie. Evidence doesn't. The hallway was sealed off. Yellow barrier tape stretched across entry points. Officers logged every movement with careful handwriting. Inside room 2004, the atmosphere felt still, not chaotic, but paused, like a scene mid-sentence. Harlow was no longer there. She had already been transported to the medical examiner's office. But the room held fragments of her final moments. A dropped phone near the wall, a cardigan folded on a chair, an untouched bottle of water beside the nightstand. Detective Maddox paused near the foot of the bed, taking everything in quietly before speaking. "Who found her?" she asked. "Night manager," an officer replied. "Name's Cole Harrington." "Where is he?" "Waiting downstairs. He's shaken but cooperative." Maddox nodded. She scanned the scene again, slowly, methodically, before stepping back. Next door, in room 2006, officers had already spoken briefly with Sienna Clark, though the conversation produced very little. She didn't remember the elevator. She didn't remember entering the room. She didn't even remember finishing the second cocktail. Her voice shook as she tried to answer basic questions. "Did you feel unsafe at any point?" the officer asked gently. Sienna stared at the wall for a long time before whispering, "I don't know." Memory loss isn't unusual in alcohol-related cases, but this change, from fully functioning to nearly unconscious, didn't match the timeline or amount consumed. Detectives noticed that immediately. A paramedic on scene muttered quietly to another responder, "Something's off." Downstairs, in a quiet staff office, Cole Harrington sat waiting. His hands were folded tightly, not nervous but processing. Detective Maddox entered the room and introduced herself. Cole nodded respectfully. "I need you to walk me through everything," she said. "Every detail. Even if it feels small." Cole took a breath. They checked in around maybe 2:45, 2 women, 2 men. The women weren't fully aware, not unconscious, but disconnected, like they were responding slower than normal conversation. Maddox took notes. And the men? Alert, calm, they knew where they were going. Did anyone ask for help? Complain? Show visible distress? No. He paused. But the body language didn't match what I've seen from drunk guests. How so? Cole leaned forward. Drunk people laugh. They slur words. They stumble. These girls, weren't stumbling. They were fading. The room fell quiet for a moment. Maddox looked up at him. That's an important distinction. By mid-morning, detectives moved to their next step. Footage review. Thousands of true crime documentaries have shown what happens next, but the real process is slower, less cinematic, more patient. Screens filled the hotel's small surveillance room. The footage played without dramatic music, just digital timestamps, hallway numbers, and pixel-clean clarity. The detectives watched. Harlow entering the lobby, Sienna laughing, Travis leading, Aiden hovering, wheelchairs, elevator, doors, nothing violent, nothing overt, but everything meaningful. Run that again, Maddox said. The screen rewound. She watched the exact moment the two men glanced at each other. A small nod exchanged, subtle but deliberate. Pause. The frame froze. Travis Monroe's face was relaxed. Aiden Brooks's expression was uneasy. Not guilt, but hesitation. Print that, Maddox ordered. Back at headquarters, a forensic pathology team began their work. They didn't know Harlow personally. They didn't know her laugh or her plans or the text she sent her mom before the concert. But their job wasn't emotional. It was scientific. And science began to answer what no witness could yet explain. Preliminary findings suggested impairment beyond alcohol, something affecting motor control and awareness. Not conclusive yet, but enough to raise suspicion. Enough to turn this from a tragic incident into a criminal investigation. By late afternoon, tracking the suspects became the priority. Travis and Aiden hadn't attempted to hide. They used rideshare services, used their real names, and paid with cards tied to their identities. Detectives traced them to an apartment less than 3 miles from the hotel. Officers approached calmly, knocking professionally. No sirens, no shouting. Aiden opened the door first. His reaction wasn't shock. It was resignation. Travis appeared behind him, expression unchanged. Detective Maddox spoke clearly. You're not under arrest at this moment, but we are asking you to come with us for questioning. Aiden nodded. Travis smiled faintly, polite, unbothered. Of course. Inside the interview room, 2 different conversations unfolded, not because of strategy, but because of psychology. Aiden sat with his shoulders hunched, hands clasped, voice low. I didn't mean for anything bad to happen, he said. Did you know what was happening? Maddox asked. His eyes flickered, the kind of flicker detectives are trained to notice. I wasn't sure. What does that mean? Aiden swallowed. It means I knew something didn't feel right, but I told myself it wasn't my business. Silence filled the room. Not judgment, just reality landing. Down the hall, Travis's interview carried a different tone. He wasn't defensive. He wasn't anxious. He was controlled. Everything was consensual, he repeated calmly. They were just drunk. It happens. Maddox leaned forward. They couldn't walk. Travis shrugged. Some people can't handle alcohol. Maddox let the silence linger, long enough that most people would fill it just to escape the discomfort. Travis didn't. He simply sat back and waited, as if patience was a tactic. Before the day ended, detectives placed both men on an investigative hold, legal, temporary, and standard procedure when someone dies unexpectedly under unclear circumstances. Evidence was still processing. Toxicology was underway. Statements were being compared to timelines. But one thing was already clear. This wasn't just a night gone wrong. It was a sequence of choices. Slow, calm, deliberate. And the investigation had only just begun. Some answers in an investigation arrive quietly. Others arrive like a door closing. Final, undeniable, impossible to ignore. For the detectives working Harlow Bennett's case, the moment that changed everything wasn't dramatic. It didn't involve a confession, a sudden outburst, or a clue hidden in plain sight. It came in the form of a printed report. Stamped, signed, clinical, the autopsy results. At the Denver Medical Examiner's office, sterile white walls and stainless steel tables tell stories most people never hear. The examiners who work there don't look for meaning. They look for truth written inside the human body. That morning, Chief Forensic Pathologist Dr. Evelyn Hart stood beside a stack of case files. She had read thousands in her career. Some told long stories, others told short ones. Harlow's told a complicated one. The toxicology results confirmed what investigators already suspected. The alcohol in her system didn't match her level of impairment. A second substance was present. Not lethal by itself, not immediately obvious, but powerful enough to remove control, awareness, and judgment. Enough to erase memory. Enough to prevent resistance. Enough to change the meaning of everything that happened after she left the bar. Dr. Hart documented it with clinical clarity. Cause of death: respiratory failure with evidence consistent with external airway obstruction. Contributing factor: incapacitating substance detected. Not an accident, not a medical collapse, not an unexplained tragedy, a preventable death. The report didn't accuse anyone, but it eliminated coincidence. Back at the precinct, Detective Renee Maddox read the report twice, not because she doubted it, but because the words carried weight. When she entered the interview room again, she wasn't asking questions anymore. She was building a case. Aiden sat quietly when she returned, hands interlocked, eyes fixed on the table. His energy was different now, the uncertainty from earlier shifting into something heavier. Maddox placed the report in front of him. "We received the autopsy," she said calmly. Aiden didn't touch the paper, but his breathing changed. Slow at first, then uneven. Maddox didn't raise her voice or push aggressively. She simply let silence do its work. Finally, she spoke again. "Aiden, this wasn't just alcohol." He closed his eyes, not in denial, in realization. Sometimes the truth isn't new. It just becomes impossible to ignore. After a long pause, he whispered, "I didn't give them anything." Maddox nodded. "I didn't say you did." His eyes lifted, surprised, because for the first time he understood. She didn't see him as the mastermind. She saw him as someone who knew more than he said. Aiden exhaled, one slow, defeated breath. "Travis brought everything," he murmured. "He said it would make things easier. He told me not to ask questions." "Did you?" Maddox asked. Aiden stared at the floor. "No." There are many forms of guilt. The guilt of doing harm, the guilt of enabling harm, and the guilt of doing nothing. Aiden carried the third. With Travis, the dynamic shifted. He skimmed the report with a detached calm, like someone reading a contract, not a death report. "None of this proves intent," he said. It proves incapacity, Maddox replied. Travis leaned back in his chair. You're assuming responsibility is mine. Maddox met his gaze without blinking. You brought the substance. You led the group. You booked the rooms. You moved 2 unconscious women down a hallway. And one of them never woke up. Travis smiled. Small, cold, controlled. That doesn't mean what you think it means. But beneath the calm, something flickered. Irritation replacing confidence. For the first time since the investigation began, Travis felt pressure. And Maddox saw it. While the interviews unfolded, detectives worked the other side of the case. Evidence. The hotel's master keycard logs confirmed movement into both rooms. The ride-share timestamp aligned with the bar exit. Phone data placed Travis and Aiden at the same bar earlier in the night, long before they randomly approached Harlow and Sienna. Every piece of evidence tightened the narrative. Not a coincidence, a pattern. Next came digital forensics, phone extractions, message histories, deleted files. On Travis Monroe's device, investigators found multiple encrypted conversations, most harmless, one not. A message sent 1 week before the night of the incident read, "Make sure they can't fight it. That's the point." No names, no details, but implications strong enough to shift the tone of the case. Suddenly, the detectives weren't just working a death investigation. They were tracing behavior, planning, opportunity, and motive. Meanwhile, Sienna recovered enough for a second interview. Her memory was still fractured, but fragments returned, images more than events. I remember the drinks tasted strong, she said quietly. And after that? A flash of blue lights, carpet pattern, someone pushing me in a chair. Most importantly, one sentence surfaced from the bar. "Don't worry, we do this all the time." She didn't remember who said it, but the effect was enough. Her voice trembled for the first time. Not from fear, from anger. By the end of the week, the investigation reached its first checkpoint. Not the final answer, but the beginning of accountability. Prosecutors filed charges of involuntary manslaughter and administration of a controlled substance with intent to incapacitate against Travis Monroe. For Aiden Brooks, the charges were different. Accessory to felony, failure to report a crime, and reckless endangerment. Different roles, different decisions, different consequences. When Aiden heard the charges read, he didn't argue. He just lowered his head, the weight of every moment catching up. Travis showed no visible reaction. But silence doesn't mean innocence. Sometimes it means calculation. As the legal process moved forward, detectives returned to the evidence wall, the timeline complete, the story no longer fragmented. A bar, a drink, a ride, a hallway, 2 rooms, 1 life gone. Not because of fate, but because someone believed they could control the outcome, and someone else didn't stop them. Outside the courthouse, life continued as normal. Traffic signals changing, coffee shops opening, students walking to class. Most people had no idea something irreversible had happened less than a mile away. That's how true crime works in the real world. Sometimes the loudest tragedies are the quiet ones, the kind that unfold behind locked doors, in private rooms, under soft lighting and routine patterns. The kind that leave evidence answering questions when people no longer can. Courtrooms don't feel like justice, not at first. They feel like waiting rooms for truth. The walls are plain. The chairs are uncomfortable. The air carries a mix of paper, coffee, and something unspoken, something heavy. For families, it's where hope and fear sit side by side. For defendants, it's where confidence is tested. For investigators, it's where evidence finally has a voice. And for juries, it's where ordinary people are asked to decide something extraordinary. By the time State of Colorado versus Travis Monroe and Aiden Brooks officially began, months had passed since the night at Marigold Tower Hotel. Time didn't soften the loss. It only organized it into folders, labels, timelines, and testimony schedules. But underneath all the structure, one truth remained unchanged. A young woman was gone. Another would never fully remember the night that reshaped her life, and two men would now have to answer for why. The courtroom filled quietly. Reporters sat in the back row tapping on keyboards before the judge even entered. The Bennetts, Harlow's parents, sat together in the front, hands clasped tightly. Across the aisle sat the defendants. Aiden Brooks looked smaller than he had during interviews. Eyes down, shoulders slumped, as if he'd aged years instead of months. Travis Monroe looked nearly unchanged, still composed, still measured, still the same unreadable stillness he carried since the investigation began. When the judge entered, everyone rose. Then came the words that would carry the trial forward. The state may proceed. The prosecutor began with a simple sentence. This case is about choice, not fate, not accident. Choice. She spoke calmly, not dramatically, explaining step by step the story the evidence would tell. The bar, the drinks, the ride, the hotel, the silence. She reminded the jury this was not about theories, but about actions that removed someone's ability to make decisions. When she said Harlow's name, the courtroom shifted, not loudly, but noticeably. A mother inhaled sharply. A father blinked hard. Then came the defense. For Aiden, his attorney argued he was a follower, not an instigator. That fear, immaturity, and poor judgment were responsible, not malicious intent. For Travis, the strategy was different. His attorney painted a picture of misunderstanding. Two adults meeting two others, alcohol, bad decisions, and tragedy, not crime. There was no intent, he said. No violence, no assault. Just a night that went wrong. It was a simple narrative, one designed to create doubt. Doubt is powerful in a courtroom. Sometimes more powerful than truth. Detective Renee Maddox took the stand. She didn't posture. She didn't dramatize. She simply walked through facts. Keycard data, hotel timestamps, security footage stills, phone metadata. Every piece aligned, not loosely, but tightly, like gears in a machine. The prosecutor asked, "Detective, in your professional opinion, does the timeline suggest coincidence or deliberate action?" Maddox paused, not for drama, but for accuracy. Her answer was simple. Deliberate. Dr. Evelyn Hart spoke next. Her tone was clinical, not emotional, not softened. She explained the toxicology findings, the physical indicators of incapacitation, and the mechanism of airway restriction. Not graphic, just factual. The jury listened in silence. Some shifted uncomfortably, not because of gore, but because of clarity. When asked whether Harlow could have protected herself, Dr. Hart answered, "No, she was fully impaired." Those 5 words landed heavy. They removed uncertainty. They removed the narrative of accident. And they gave context to the quiet horror of that night. When Sienna Clark was called to the stand, the room shifted again. Not tense, just quiet in a different way. A way that acknowledged her presence wasn't just evidence, it was survival. She spoke carefully. Her voice was steady, but the pauses between sentences revealed how close her memories were to disappearing forever. "I remember the music," she said softly, and laughing. She described the confusion, the sudden loss of clarity, and the final flashes she could recall. Neon lights, the feeling of being moved, the carpet pattern near the elevator. When the prosecutor asked if she remembered giving consent to go to the hotel, her answer was immediate. "No, I would never have done that." Defense attorneys chose not to aggressively challenge her. The jury was watching. Everyone was. Aiden testified first. His voice shook, not constantly, but enough. He admitted regret. He admitted he should have stopped things. He admitted he knew something felt wrong. When asked the hardest question, "Why didn't you stop it?" his eyes filled, but his voice stayed audible. "I was scared," he whispered. It didn't excuse him, but it revealed something human. Then came Travis. He took the stand with controlled posture and calm tone. His words were measured, precise, rehearsed. He insisted everything was consensual, that the women were just drunk, that nothing was intentional. But when shown a single text, the message detectives had found earlier, the courtroom froze. "Make sure they can't fight it. That's the point." Travis blinked, just once. For the first time, his expression shifted. Not panic, not guilt, just a slight break in the practiced confidence. A silence followed. A silence thicker than anger, thicker than grief. The kind of silence where everyone in the room understands something is no longer defensible. The prosecutor's final words weren't emotional. They were steady. Responsibility is not measured by intention alone. It is measured by outcome. And the outcome here was irreversible. The defense asked the jury to consider doubt. To consider what wasn't seen, what wasn't recorded, what couldn't be proven beyond interpretation. Then came deliberation. Hours passed, then more. No one spoke in the halls. Not the families, not the reporters, not the detectives. Some truths take time to settle. When the jury returned, the room held its breath. The foreperson stood. For Aiden Brooks, guilty, accessory to felony, and failure to report. Aiden closed his eyes, not resisting, just accepting. For Travis Monroe, guilty, involuntary manslaughter and administration of a controlled substance with intent. Travis didn't move. He didn't drop his gaze. He simply stared forward, as if waiting for the moment to make sense. But justice rarely feels like understanding. Most times, it feels like acknowledgement. For the Bennetts, the verdict didn't restore life. It didn't erase loss, but it meant someone finally said aloud, "What happened was wrong, and someone was responsible." And sometimes, in the long shadow of tragedy, that's the closest thing people get to justice. Sentencing day doesn't arrive with surprise. It doesn't feel sudden. It feels like time slowing to a crawl. Like everyone involved already knows what's coming, but no one is ready to hear it spoken aloud. Outside the courthouse, the world moved normally, cars rushing past, backpacks on college students, early lunch crowds gathering around food trucks. But inside, there was a different kind of silence. One that held weight. One that acknowledged that decisions made months ago still carried consequences now. The courtroom wasn't as full as during the trial. The media presence reduced, the observers fewer. The frenzy had passed. But for the families, the detectives, the attorneys, and the defendants, this moment mattered more than any headline ever would. Aiden Brooks entered first. His expression wasn't confused anymore. It wasn't defensive. It was resigned. Reality had settled in. Not shock, just something heavy and unavoidable. Travis Monroe entered after. He walked with the same composure he had maintained since the beginning, shoulders straight, steps steady, no outward reaction. If there was fear or regret, it stayed locked behind the expression he had shown since the night he was questioned. The judge took her seat, and the room rose. Then everyone sat again, and the proceeding began. Before the court issued sentencing, victim impact statements were allowed. The Bennetts stood together, Jonathan speaking first, Elise beside him. His voice wasn't angry. It wasn't loud. It was controlled. The way someone speaks when every word carries meaning. He talked about Harlow, not the case, not the legal language, not the evidence. He talked about her laugh, her piano music, the way she used to fall asleep on the couch with a blanket half covering her face, the way she always took a moment before answering a question, as if making sure her words were right. He talked about the moment they received the call from Denver police, the kind of call that rewrites everything life used to be. When he finished, Elise spoke. Her voice was softer. She didn't talk about the night or the crime. She spoke about the empty seat at holidays, the unopened messages in family group texts, the future that shouldn't have ended before it began. Sienna sat in the gallery behind them, eyes lowered. She didn't need to speak. Her presence was a reminder of how close the outcome came to being even worse. When it was time for the defense to respond, Aiden's attorney asked the court to consider remorse, cooperation, and youth. He didn't excuse him. He didn't deny the facts. He simply argued that Aiden was led, not leading. That the worst choice he made was not acting when he should have. Aiden spoke briefly, not scripted, not polished. I didn't stop it. I should have. I think about that every day. It wasn't an attempt to reduce punishment. It sounded like something he needed to say aloud because he hadn't been able to say it earlier. Then it was Travis's turn. His attorney argued predictability. No criminal history, no violence, no pattern. A tragedy, not an intention. But when given the chance to speak, Travis declined. Not rude, not stubborn, just silent. The judge waited a moment before continuing. Courtrooms often build to a single moment, the moment where law, evidence, testimony, and consequences converge into one decision. For Aiden Brooks, the judge spoke first. Your choices did not cause the initial harm, but they allowed it to continue. You saw something wrong. You understood it, and you did not act. She paused. Failure to do the right thing is not harmless. It is a decision. Aiden received sentences for accessory to felony and failure to report a crime, not life-destroying, but life-changing. A sentence that would stay on record, shape his future, restrict choices, but still allow the possibility of rebuilding. When the judge turned to Travis, the tone changed. Not emotional, but firm. A kind of finality. You removed another person's autonomy. You ensured she could not choose. And because of that, she never had a chance to protect herself. She continued, not with anger, but with clarity. Justice cannot return what was taken, but it must acknowledge responsibility. Then the words came. The ones that shifted the case from narrative to conclusion. For involuntary manslaughter and administration of a controlled substance with intent, the court sentences you to a custodial term within the statutory maximum. The details were spoken. The record was made. No one cheered. No one gasped. Justice rarely feels cinematic. Most often it feels like a door closing quietly. Travis remained still, His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Aidan exhaled, long, unsteady, and the Bennetts, after months of hearings, questions, statements, and waiting, simply sat in stillness. Because sentencing doesn't end grief. It only ends uncertainty. In the weeks that followed, the city moved forward. News cycles shifted to other stories. Students began new semesters. The hotel on the 20th floor repaired carpet, repainted walls, and replaced the keycard logs. For detectives, the case file moved from active board to closed archive. But for those connected to Harlow, closure didn't mean forgetting. The Bennetts returned to Vermont, not to escape, but to reconnect with pieces of life untouched by the loss. On the piano in their living room, Harlow's sheet music still rested on the stand, pages slightly worn from practice. Some days, Elise played a few notes. Some days, she closed the lid without touching it. Sienna began therapy. She didn't try to rush healing. She didn't try to bury what happened. She carried a quiet determination to honor what she survived, not with guilt, but with purpose. And as for Aidan, his sentence included rehabilitation programs rather than isolation. His trajectory would be shaped by accountability and reflection. Time would decide who he became afterward. Travis entered the correction system. Whatever confidence he once carried no longer mattered as much as compliance. His future was now defined by consequences, not choice. In documentaries, endings often feel definitive. In reality, endings are quieter. The case would eventually fade from headlines. The courthouse would take on new trials. New defendants would sit where Travis and Aidan once did. New families would wait for verdicts that reshape their lives. But one detail remains clear. Justice isn't measured by how loudly it arrives. It's measured by the acknowledgement that truth was heard, responsibility was named, and silence did not get the final word. And somewhere in Vermont, a family kept a light on, not because they expected someone to return, but because they understood something profound. Memory isn't what keeps someone alive. Love does, and love, unlike tragedy, doesn't end. When a trial ends, most people assume the story is over. The verdict is read, the sentence delivered, and the courtroom empties. But real life doesn't fold itself neatly when the legal system closes a file. What remains afterward is quieter, harder to see, and far more complicated. For the Bennett family, the world did not snap back into focus. Nothing felt resolved. Nothing felt repaired. But something had shifted. The uncertainty they carried for months, those questions that looped endlessly in their minds, finally had structure. Not answers that healed, but answers that existed. After returning home to Vermont, Jonathan and Elise found themselves walking through rooms that felt identical and unfamiliar at the same time. Harlow's bedroom door stayed closed for the first few weeks, not because they couldn't enter, but because they needed to decide when the world was quiet enough to do so. Eventually, Elise opened it. It wasn't dramatic. No tears, no collapse. Just a slow turn of the doorknob and a breath held halfway. Inside, there were pieces of a life paused mid-sentence, a sweater draped over a chair, a book beside the bed with the corner of a page folded, and a calendar still marked with her planned return date from Denver. Grief isn't loud. Not really. It's heavy. Heavy in memories, in moments, in small details no one expects to matter until they're the only things left. Jonathan found comfort in routine. Morning coffee, walking the dog, tending the backyard. Not because routine erased pain, but because it gave time shape again. Some nights, they talked about Harlow. Other nights, they didn't. Both were okay. In Denver, the aftermath looked different. The Marigold Tower Hotel replaced carpeting on the 20th floor, updated security protocol, and held staff retraining sessions. But even after repairs, the hallway still carried a different kind of silence, the kind shaped by memory rather than noise. Guests passed through without knowing what happened, but staff remembered. Cole Harrington still worked the night shift, though his approach changed. He watched more closely. He questioned details he might have dismissed before. A choice that seemed small now felt necessary. Not paranoia, awareness. Sometimes one moment rewrites the way a person sees the world. As for Sienna Clark, her life moved forward carefully. Healing doesn't follow a clock or a calendar. It doesn't progress in a straight line. Some days she felt steady. Other days, memories surfaced unexpectedly. Not full scenes, just fragments, neon bar lights, laughter echoing too loudly, the feeling of movement she didn't control. She started attending support groups, not because she needed answers, but because she needed connection. She talked about fear, confusion, guilt, and survival. And in those rooms, she discovered she wasn't alone. Many people carry stories that never made the news, but changed them forever. Eventually, she enrolled in advocacy training programs. She didn't call it a mission or purpose. It was simply something she couldn't walk away from now that she understood how fast safety can disappear. She didn't speak about the trial often, but when she did, she said one line more than any other. I didn't know how fast trust could turn into danger. It wasn't bitterness, just truth. Aiden Brooks began his sentence in a state facility designed for rehabilitation-focused offenders. It wasn't harsh, but it wasn't soft. It required honesty, accountability, reflection. The first few weeks were quiet. He spoke little. He spent time reading, attending counseling sessions, and writing letters he never mailed. Letters to Harlow's family, to Sienna, to himself at 18, 19, 20. Some days he struggled with the reality that he didn't cause the first harm, but he didn't stop it. That truth followed him more heavily than the legal charges ever could. Gradually, he began to change, not in a sudden transformation, but in small ways. He volunteered in educational programs, completed coursework, and worked toward something resembling responsibility. He understood now that silence can be a decision too. Travis Monroe entered the correctional system with a different posture. His composure didn't break immediately. For months, he behaved the same way he did in court, calculated, reserved, self-contained. But the rhythm of incarceration wears differently depending on who a person was before it began. And over time, the absence of control, no schedule chosen, no environment curated, no narrative managed, began to reshape his edges. He wasn't violent. He wasn't openly angry. But he was no longer a person who believed he operated above consequence. Inside, time isn't measured by clocks or daylight. It's measured in patterns, meals, head counts, checkpoints, lights out. And within those patterns, Travis faced what he had spent months avoiding: silence without spotlight. Some realizations are loud, others arrive without ceremony. His came quietly. Detective Renee Maddox closed the case file one evening in her office. She didn't frame things symbolically or attach meaning to the conclusion. She simply placed the folder among others she had worked over the years. Cases never belong to detectives. Not really. They belong to families, victims, and the time in which they occurred. Investigators simply carry them long enough to uncover what truth they can. But long after the paperwork was archived, One detail stayed with her. Not the evidence, not the interviews, but something Harlow's father said in court. We can't change what happened, but we can choose what happens next. It wasn't about forgiveness. It wasn't about closure. It was about continuing. Years later, Harlow's name would appear in scholarship programs, campus safety seminars, and nonprofit work dedicated to protecting students studying away from home. Her story, while painful, became a caution that carried purpose. People who never met her would learn her name, not because she wanted attention, but because someone needed to create change where she no longer could. And in quiet moments, when the world felt still, her family felt something that wasn't relief, or resolution, or forgetting. It was something softer. The knowledge that love continues, even when life does not. Because justice may live in courtrooms, but memory lives in the spaces people once filled. And sometimes, the most powerful ending isn't dramatic. It's the commitment to remember, to learn, and to do better, because someone can't come home. With time, stories shift. At first, they live in headlines, on news tickers, in discussion threads, and in conversations whispered across dinner tables. But eventually, the world moves on, leaving only those closest to carry what remains. Months passed after the sentencing. Seasons changed. Winter softened into spring in Vermont, and the Bennett home began to feel less like a place where time had stopped, and more like a place where time was allowed to move gently again. One afternoon, Elise found herself sorting through stored boxes she hadn't touched since before Harlow left for Denver. Inside one of them was a journal, its pages filled not with diary entries, but with plans. Lists of places Harlow wanted to visit, books she planned to read, classes she hoped to take. A page titled Someday. There were no dramatic reactions. Just a quiet recognition. Life is built out of plans the future may not always allow someone to fulfill. Instead of closing the book and storing it again, Elise placed it on the small table beside the piano. Not as a monument, but as something alive. Meanwhile, on the campus where Harlow once studied, conversations about student travel and safety began to grow. Not because the case demanded fear, but because her story reminded others how easily safety can be assumed instead of ensured. Professors started including brief discussions on risk awareness in orientation. A campus administrator proposed a scholarship in Harlow's name, dedicated to students pursuing criminology, social justice, or international study. It wasn't about tragedy, it was about continuation. A committee approved the idea unanimously. And for the first time since the trial, Jonathan and Elise received a letter connected to their daughter that didn't feel like a record or request. It felt like acknowledgement. They agreed to the scholarship without hesitation. Not because it replaced anything, but because it honored something that had always been true. Harlow believed education mattered. In Denver, Detective Renee Maddox continued her work. New cases filled her schedule. Missing persons, property crimes, a string of identity theft reports. Life as an investigator rarely allows stillness. But sometimes, when she passed the evidence room, she thought about the folder marked with the Bennett case number. Not with lingering uncertainty, but with a sense of responsibility. She stayed in touch with the Bennetts. Not frequently, not formally. Just enough to remind them that someone who worked on the case still remembered their daughter not as evidence, but as a person. Some cases close on paper. Others stay open in memory. As for Sienna Clark, her path kept unfolding. She completed trauma counseling training and began volunteering at a center that offered support to young adults navigating recovery after frightening or disorienting experiences. The first time she sat across from someone who said, "I don't remember everything. I just know something was wrong," she knew her work had purpose. She didn't tell her story often. She didn't need to. Every time she showed up, calm, steady, present, she lived out the message the trial had carved deeply into her life. Survival is not just about escaping danger. It's about learning to trust life again. She continued writing occasionally. Not a memoir, not a documentary, just thoughts, reflections, letters she didn't send, notes to a past version of herself who didn't yet understand how quickly ordinary could turn into unforgettable. Sometimes she wrote one sentence at the top of a blank page, "Tomorrow will feel different." And then she turned the page. Aidan Brooks served his sentence quietly. He completed rehabilitation programs, earned certifications, and agreed to speak, once released, at youth accountability seminars. His message wasn't centered around guilt, nor defense, nor explanation. It was simple. If something feels wrong, you don't wait, you act. He never tried to rewrite the past. He carried it with him as a lesson that came at a cost no one should have paid. When he was eventually released, there was no crowd waiting, no attention. Just open sky, a duffel bag, and the simple truth of someone stepping into a second chance. Aidan didn't seek forgiveness. He sought change. Travis Monroe remained in the correctional system, adjusting to a life defined by structure and routine. Some inmates grow angry as the years proceed. Others grow quieter. Travis became quiet, not defeated, but inward. Something about isolation forces reflection. Not the sudden kind, but the gradual kind that arrives after days that feel identical when there is no audience to perform for. Correction officers noted that he read more. He attended education classes. He participated in programs not because they shortened sentences, but because they created ways to pass time with purpose. No one knew what he would be when his sentence eventually ended. Sometimes the future is the most uncertain part of a story. As the one-year anniversary approached, a small gathering took place in Vermont. Not a memorial, not a ceremony, just people who loved Harlow. Family, a few friends, a neighbor who baked muffins and didn't know what else to offer. Sienna, who traveled quietly without expecting to speak, and Detective Maddox, who came not as an investigator, but as someone who witnessed the case. They met by a lake where Harlow used to jog in the early morning sunlight. There were no speeches prepared, just memory. Jonathan brought a single white lantern. It wasn't symbolic or dramatic. It was simply something gentle. They set it onto the water and watched it drift. No tears were required. No silence was forced. Everyone simply existed in the same moment, acknowledging a life that mattered. As the lantern floated farther from shore, Elise placed her hand on Jonathan's arm and whispered, not loudly, not for anyone else to hear, "She's still changing the world." He nodded, because she was. Not in the way people imagine heroes, not through fame or recognition, but through the ripples left behind. The kind that move quietly, gradually, undeniably. A scholarship, a safety program, a survivor helping survivors, a detective who investigates differently, a young man who now chooses responsibility over silence. Legacies aren't built from what is lost. They're built from what continues. And even after headlines fade, after courtrooms empty, after time softens the sharpest edges of grief, one truth remains. Some lives leave echoes strong enough to outlast their ending. And Harlow Bennett's story, though brief, continued to shape lives, protect strangers, and remind a world that often rushes forward to slow down, pay attention, and remember. Every choice matters. Every moment matters. Every life matters. Sometimes stories end quietly, not with a final statement, but with understanding. Months after the lantern drifted across the lake, life had settled into a new rhythm. Not the rhythm anyone wanted, but one shaped by what remained. In Vermont, the Bennett home moved forward piece by piece. Jonathan returned to weekend hikes, the kind where the forest is still and breathing feels easier. Elise joined a community book club, not because she needed distraction, but because she needed connection. They didn't avoid talking about Harlow. They didn't force it either. Her presence lived in the pauses, gentle, familiar, never fading. On the day the first scholarship recipient was announced, the Bennetts traveled to the university auditorium. It was a modest ceremony, not televised, not large, but meaningful. The student who received it, a young woman studying criminal justice, shook their hands with both gratitude and a quiet recognition of the weight behind the award. When Elise handed her the certificate, she said just one sentence: "Use your life well." The student nodded, not as obligation, but promise. Across the country, inside a correctional facility where routine guided the day, Aiden Brooks continued to change. Not dramatically or suddenly, but steadily. He worked in the library, organizing books and learning how to help other inmates apply for education programs. Sometimes he wrote in a notebook, thoughts, reflections, promises he didn't say aloud. He didn't try to erase his past or rewrite memory. He carried it carefully, like something fragile and real. During a group session one afternoon, another participant asked him, "Do you ever think you'll forgive yourself?" Aiden took time before answering. "I don't know if that's the point," he finally said. "I think the point is making sure the person I become would have stopped what happened." Not regret. Responsibility. Meanwhile, Travis Monroe continued serving his sentence, and within those walls, time stretched differently. He no longer carried himself with the same untouchable confidence he once had. He spoke less, observed more, and engaged with programs he previously dismissed. Correction officers noted changes, not dramatic, not forced, simply consistent. He attended classes about empathy, consent, accountability, not because it reduced time served, but because something inside him finally stopped insisting he already understood everything. If there was transformation, it wasn't one anyone celebrated. It wasn't redemption. It was consequence shaping behavior and time reshaping perspective. Some lessons come too late to prevent harm, but not too late to prevent repetition. In Denver, the Marigold Tower Hotel continued its normal operations. Guests checked in and out, unaware of the history on the 20th floor. Most stories leave no visible trace, just changed policies, updated training, and heightened awareness. Cole, the night clerk, still thought about that evening, not with regret alone, but with resolve. Now, when guests appeared uncomfortable, confused, or barely conscious, he asked questions. He intervened. He chose awareness over convenience. Sometimes safety depends on noticing what most people overlook. Detective Renee Maddox moved on to new cases, new evidence, new interviews. But the Bennett case left something with her. Not weight, but clarity. She began speaking at local high schools and colleges, offering workshops about boundaries, travel safety, and how manipulation often appears ordinary at first glance. She never referenced the case directly. She didn't need to. The lessons were universal. In one session, a young student raised a hand and asked, "How do you know when someone is dangerous?" Renee answered honestly, "You don't always know, but if something feels wrong, trust that. Paying attention early can save someone later." Silence followed, not uncomfortable but thoughtful. Sienna Clark's life continued unfolding slowly, intentionally. One morning, she recorded a short video for a support group she ran. She sat near a window with soft morning light behind her and spoke calmly. "You don't have to remember everything to know something hurt you. Healing isn't about knowing every detail. It's about reclaiming every part of your life afterward." The video wasn't polished or scripted, but it resonated. People reached out, not for advice, but because her voice sounded like someone who understood without needing explanation. She planned to write a book someday, not about the case, but about survival, choice, intuition, and recovery. But she didn't rush it. Some stories need time to breathe before they are written. Seasons changed again. Leaves turned gold, then fell. Winter returned to Vermont with its quiet mornings and long evenings. On the anniversary of the scholarship ceremony, the Bennetts returned to the lake, not with a group, not as an event, but as a moment. This time, when they set a lantern onto the water, they didn't watch it drift with sadness. They watched it drift with stillness. Jonathan placed his hand gently over Elise's as the lantern moved slowly outward, the warm flicker reflecting across the calm surface. After a moment, Elise spoke, not to the lake, not to the wind, but simply aloud. She changed more lives than she ever knew. Jonathan nodded, breath visible in the cold air. "I think," he said quietly, "that's how legacy works. It keeps going long after we stop seeing its shape." They didn't linger long. They didn't need to. The act wasn't ritual. It was acknowledgement. A reminder that love remains, memory remains, impact remains. Stories like this don't end with a single moment. They continue through changed decisions, new awareness, shared lessons, and the quiet ways people choose differently after understanding what went wrong. Some people walk through the world the same after encountering darkness. Others carry forward something else, a heightened awareness, a deeper empathy, a responsibility to protect, observe, and intervene when something feels wrong. That is the echo of Harlow Bennett's life. Not fear, not tragedy, but change. A lantern carried across water doesn't brighten the world instantly, but it becomes a point of light in darkness. A reminder, a starting place. And sometimes that is enough to ensure that one life, not lived long enough, continues shaping countless others, not through headlines, not through sorrow, but through memory turned into action, through loss turned into purpose, through silence turned into awareness, and through the simple belief that what happens to one person can reshape how others choose to live. With enough time, stories stop feeling like events and start feeling like lessons, not in a way that erases what happened, but in a way that reshapes how people move through the world afterward. The Bennett case was no longer something discussed in headlines or argued in courtrooms. It had become something quieter, more personal, a reminder. Across Vermont, the scholarship in Harlow's name continued each year. The number of applicants grew, not because of publicity, but because word spread that the award wasn't just financial support. It represented a life lived with curiosity, kindness, and care. Each year, the student who received it met with the Bennetts privately. No speeches, no cameras, just conversation. Some students talked about their goals. Some talked about their fears. Some talked about what safety meant to them now that the world wasn't just theoretical. Every year, Elise listened, sometimes offering advice, sometimes simply being present. Jonathan often stayed quiet, nodding, letting each student speak freely without feeling examined or judged. Harlow's impact reached more people now than she ever could have met in her lifetime, not through tragedy, but through guidance, awareness, and connection. In Denver, Detective Maddox stood before a class at a local university, a guest speaker now invited yearly. The auditorium wasn't packed, but those who attended listened closely. She didn't talk about cases with sensationalism or fear. Instead, she spoke about awareness, consent, intuition, and intervention. This year, a student approached her afterward and said, "It feels strange learning this. Like the worst things happen when you expect the least." Renee gave the same answer she always gave, an answer she knew was true. It's not about expecting danger everywhere. It's about recognizing your right to feel safe. The student nodded slowly, and for a moment, the weight of knowledge shifted, not crushing, but anchoring. Teaching prevention wasn't about creating fear. It was about restoring confidence. Sienna continued her work as well. She led small support programs, online sessions, and community discussions about boundaries and healing. Over time, she received messages from people across the country, strangers who saw themselves reflected in her experience. Some said they were grateful someone finally put words to what they couldn't explain. Others said they now spoke up when something felt wrong. A few said they wished they had learned these lessons earlier. One message stayed with her. "You reminded me it's not my fault I froze. It's my strength that I survived." Those words mattered, not because they erased what happened, but because they replaced silence with understanding. Healing isn't measured by forgetting. It's measured by reclaiming what fear tried to hold. Aiden completed his sentence, and when he left the facility, the world felt larger than he remembered. He found work in a community program focused on restorative justice, not as a spokesperson, not as a redemption story, but as someone willing to contribute. He spent time helping teens navigate peer pressure, boundaries, and decision-making. Sometimes, when he spoke, his voice carried a quiet seriousness, a kind that didn't need to raise volume to command attention. One teenager asked him bluntly, "Do you think you're a bad person?" Aiden paused, because the truth wasn't easy or simple. "No," he finally said. "But I let someone else lead me into doing nothing, and sometimes that's enough to cause harm." The room stayed silent, not out of discomfort, but because honesty has weight. Not heavy like guilt, heavy like reality. Travis continued serving his time. His days were structured, predictable, and consistent. Something that wasn't punishment, but perspective. Months passed, then another year. He read books he hadn't considered before. He listened more than he spoke. He participated in discussions not because he was required to, but because something inside him finally wanted to understand what he once ignored. Reflection doesn't guarantee transformation, but it creates space for it. And within those walls, responsibility became something he could no longer avoid or deflect. Not denial, not defiance, just acknowledgement. Some truths arrive slowly. As for the Bennetts, they found balance between honoring their daughter and living the life she would have wanted for them. They traveled sometimes, small trips at first, then longer ones. They visited places Harlow once wrote about in her journal. They ate at restaurants she had bookmarked. They sent postcards to themselves, signing each one the same way. for all the days you dreamed of. Years continued passing, as years always do. New students graduated with scholarships bearing her name. New programs formed using lessons learned from the case. New conversations replaced outdated assumptions. And somewhere in all of that, a legacy took shape. Not dramatic, not tragic. Human. One late summer evening, Jonathan and Elise sat on their porch, overlooking quiet woods and fading sky. The cicadas hummed in the background, and the world felt still. Elise held a cup of tea, steam curling upward. "You know," she said softly, "I used to think the story ended the day the verdict was read. But now I think it's something else." Jonathan turned slightly toward her. "What's that?" She took a breath, calm, reflective. "It isn't about ending. It's about meaning, and what people choose to carry forward." He nodded slowly, not needing more words. Some understanding exists beyond language. They sat quietly, watching fireflies blink across the yard like scattered stars. Life had changed. Loss remained, but so did love. And somewhere along the timeline of grief, sorrow had stopped being the only emotion tied to memory. In its place was something steadier, something resilient. A reminder that even when stories begin in darkness, their echoes don't have to remain there. Sometimes the most powerful legacy isn't justice. It's awareness. It's compassion. It's the willingness to choose differently, because someone no longer can. And in that quiet, unremarkable moment on their porch, beneath the slow hum of summer and fading light, the truth settled gently. Harlow's life hadn't ended. It had simply changed form, and it would continue, in voices raised when something feels wrong, in steps taken toward safety, in the choices people make with intention instead of assumption. That was her echo. Not erased, not forgotten, carried forward.